More details have been released as to why Molly Qerim abruptly quit ESPN. And when I say abruptly quit, I mean she left work, I think it was on Monday, and she never came.
Last night, she abruptly resigned as the host of the show. And to say that I'm quite sad about it is enough.
Molly Qerim didn't just leave ESPN, she vanished overnight. No warning, no countdown, just gone. But was this really a fresh start? Or the biggest scandal ESPN has tried to cover up? Let's dive in. Was Molly Qerim's departure from ESPN really a clean slate or the first visible fracture in a far more tangled and troubling story? That's the puzzle sparking debates across timelines, igniting arguments in sports bars, and fueling speculation among armchair media detectives who are convinced something bigger is lurking just out of sight. From the outside, it may look like just another name removed from the studio roster, but inside the media ecosystem, where every word is scrutinized and every power shift analyzed, Molly's sudden exit feels less like a graceful goodbye and more like the prelude to a storm. To understand why this matters, you have to appreciate who Molly was to ESPN for more than a decade. She wasn't just another face on camera, she was a constant presence at the First Take desk, a steady hand guiding the conversation, balancing the explosive energy of Stephen A. Smith, and keeping egos from tearing the set apart. That consistency mattered. In a show built on heated debates and high-octane clashes, Molly brought a sense of control, serving as the mediator, referee, and quiet anchor holding the whole machine together. Losing her is not just about swapping one host for another, it's about dismantling a dynamic that shaped one of ESPN's flagship programs. Yet the way it happened, the abruptness, the timing, the vague official statements has left a trail of unanswered questions. This wasn't the slow fade of a contract running out. It wasn't the celebratory send-off of a veteran moving on to new ventures. It was sudden, it was sharp, and it came wrapped in carefully managed language that sounded more like damage control than celebration. That's why social media has been ablaze ever since, with fans dissecting every clip, replaying every awkward exchange, and piecing together their own theories like amateur detectives. Part of the intrigue lies in what ESPN didn't say. In moments like these, corporations tend to offering glowing tributes and flowery language about legacies and new chapters. But in Molly's case, the silence between the lines was deafening. The official message was short, polite, and pointedly lacking in detail. And in an industry where perception is everything, that absence of context only fueled suspicion. Was ESPN trying to get ahead of a scandal? Were they bracing for revelations that might damage their brand? Or was this a preemptive move to protect one of their most valuable assets, Stephen A. Smith? The whispers began almost immediately. Some claimed this was nothing more than contract negotiations gone sour, that Molly wanted more money, and ESPN wasn't willing to budge. Others suggested the tensions had been building for months, pointing to on-air moments where the chemistry seemed less like friendly banter and more like genuine hostility. Fans began resurfacing clips of sharp exchanges, offhand jabs, and awkward body language, framing them as evidence of a deeper rift. Whether those moments truly reflected behind-the-scenes animosity or were simply the byproduct of live TV, they took on a new weight in the aftermath of her departure. But perhaps the most explosive theory comes from the allegations tied to Stephen A. Smith himself. According to rumors circulated online, Molly was accused by someone claiming to be Stephen A.'s ex-girlfriend of orchestrating a campaign against him. The accusations included leaking sensitive contract details, fueling rivalries, and even planting damaging stories. The picture painted wasn't just of workplace tension, but of a deliberate effort to undermine ESPN's biggest star. Whether or not those claims hold water, their very existence highlights just how combustible the environment around First Take had become. What makes this story so captivating isn't just the personal drama, it's what it reveals about ESPN's larger struggles. For years, the network has been defined by its personalities. From the bombastic debates of First Take to the polished gravitas of SportsCenter, ESPN built an empire on strong voices and strong opinions. But that reliance on star power has a dark side. It creates hierarchies, fosters rivalries, and leaves the network vulnerable when those stars clash. Stephen A. Smith has become the face of ESPN, commanding contracts that rival NFL head coaches and wielding influence that reaches beyond the set. In that environment, anyone who isn't aligned with his orbit risks being sidelined. And so, Molly's departure feels less like an isolated incident, and more like a symptom of a deeper power struggle. Was she pushed out to clear space for Malika Andrews, who has quickly risen as one of ESPN's most bankable talents? Was her exit timed to coincide with other major announcements, diverting attention away from internal conflict? Or was it the result of a behind-the-scenes explosion that the network hopes will never reach the public eye? For fans, the fascination comes from the gaps in the story. Human beings are wired to fill in blanks, and ESPN has left plenty of them. Why did Molly leave so suddenly? Why were the statements so vague? Why is Stephen A., a man known for his unfiltered commentary, suddenly so cautious and reserved whenever her name comes up? These questions create a vacuum, and into that vacuum rush speculation, conspiracy theories, and endless debate. And that, perhaps, is the irony. ESPN has built its empire on debating, people arguing passionately about what happened on the field, on the court, or in the ring. But now, the loudest and most heated debate isn't about LeBron's legacy or the NFL's rule changes. It's about ESPN itself. The network that turns sports into theater is now trapped in its own drama, and no one knows how the script will end. What we do know is this: Molly Qerim's exit is bigger than Molly Qerim. It's a mirror held up to ESPN, exposing the cracks in its foundation and the risks of building a brand so dependent on volatile personalities. It's a reminder that television isn't just about what happens on camera, it's about the relationships, politics, and power plays that happen off it. And it's a story that, for all the spin and PR gloss, refuses to be contained. Because in the end, this isn't just about one anchor leaving a show, it's about trust. Trust between colleagues, trust between a network and its talent, and trust between a brand and its audience. Once that trust is broken, or even questioned, everything else becomes unstable. ESPN may hope the story fades with time, that fans move on to the next controversy, the next viral clip, the next sports headline, but the embers are still glowing. And as long as Stephen A. keeps dropping cryptic hints, and fans keep digging through the archives, this fire won't go out anytime soon. The real question isn't whether Molly's departure was clean or messy. The real question is what it reveals about ESPN's future. Can the network continue to thrive on larger-than-life personalities without imploding under the weight of their egos? Can it balance the business of sports entertainment with the human cost of constant conflict? Or has the line between show and scandal blurred beyond repair? For now, all we can do is watch. Watch the shows, watch the statements, watch the subtle dynamics between those still sitting at the desk. And in the watching, wonder, how much of what we see is scripted, how much is real, and how much is being carefully hidden just out of view? One thing is certain: Molly Qerim's departure is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new chapter, one written not just in press releases and contracts, but in whispers, rumors, and the uneasy silence of those who know more than they're willing to say. And if history is any guide, the truth, messy, complicated, and combustible, will find its way out eventually.
Times when you have someone abruptly quit a job, they're not leaving on the best terms. Normally, it's polite to give your employer some kind of notice.
For more than a decade, Molly Qerim was the quiet heartbeat of First Take. She wasn't the loudest voice in the room, nor the one drawing the biggest paycheck, but her presence was essential. While Stephen A. Smith stormed through debates with his trademark fire and larger-than-life bravado, Molly provided the counterbalance, steady, composed, and sharp enough to keep the chaos from boiling over. Viewers might have tuned in for the fireworks, but it was Molly's firm grip on the wheel that kept the show from veering completely off the rails. She knew when to rein things in, when to let the sparks fly, and when to redirect the conversation before it spiraled out of control. In many ways, she was the unsung architect of the show's rhythm, which is why her sudden disappearance hit like a thunderclap. One morning she was there, moderating the clashes and guiding the narrative. The next, she was gone. No drawn-out farewell tour, no gradual easing off the set, just absence. And with that absence came a wave of confusion that quickly metastasized into full-blown speculation. For a show so heavily defined by its personalities, the abrupt removal of one of its central figures was impossible to ignore. Fans noticed, insiders noticed, and soon, the internet turned her departure into its own kind of spectacle. On paper, Molly's goodbye was dignified and polished. Her Instagram post followed the familiar template: warm words for her colleagues, nods to the brilliant and passionate voices she'd worked alongside, gratitude for the loyal audience, and a sprinkling of optimism about the future. It was the kind of farewell that fits neatly into a PR playbook. Positive, gracious, and vague enough to sidestep uncomfortable questions. But for those who've watched the churn of sports media long enough, those kinds of statements ring hollow. They're less a revelation than a shield, crafted to soothe the public while burying the real story under layers of polite sentiment, and ESPN, for its part, moved quickly to reinforce the fact. Within hours of Molly's announcement, the network rolled out its own carefully staged send-off, highlight reels, nostalgia-laced tributes, and rehearsed thank yous from colleagues. The tone was consistent, celebratory, respectful, and deliberately uncontroversial. To casual observers, it looked like business as usual, just another host stepping away after a successful run. But what stood out most wasn't what was said, it was what wasn't. There was no acknowledgement of the swirling speculation, no explanation of why the departure was so abrupt, no effort to address the undercurrent of tension that had been brewing on air for months. That silence spoke volumes, because in the world of live television, especially at ESPN, departures rarely happen without reason. Contracts don't just dissolve overnight. Anchor chairs aren't vacated without a plan. And statements crafted to look like transparency often masks deeper fractures behind the scenes. The public tributes may have been glossy and glowing, but behind the curtain, something else was happening. Something that ESPN was working overtime to keep out of sight. And that's where the intrigue begins. Was Molly's exit really her choice? A chance to pursue new opportunities on her own terms? Or was it the culmination of private conflicts, power struggles, and mounting resentment that finally boiled over? The polished Instagram post and ESPN's tribute package may have been designed to tie a bow on her time at the network, but they did little to quiet the rumors. In fact, by offering so little explanation, they only fanned the flames further.
Was quitting right now. Both ESPN and Molly Qerim, they are trying to polish they're trying to make this look like an amicable divorce. And look, maybe that's true. Maybe they couldn't come to an agreement and they agreed to amicably part ways. I'm more interested.
What followed was less a quiet departure and more a storyline ripped from a late-night soap opera. The first sparks didn't come from ESPN, or even from Molly herself, but from someone claiming to be Stephen A. Smith's former girlfriend. She didn't simply air grievances. She launched a full-scale assault on the network's credibility. Her accusations painted Molly Qerim as the mastermind behind a campaign to sabotage Stephen A., allegedly leaking confidential contract details and funneling rumors to his competitors. The most explosive claim, that Molly had even planted a harassment story designed to derail his entire career. According to the accuser, the motive was a volatile mix of resentment, ambition, and jealousy over Smith's ever-growing paycheck. Molly wants Stephen A.'s money without Stephen A.'s talent, she snapped in a rant that quickly went viral, framing the conflict not as a clash of roles on first take, but as a bitter fight over who truly owned the spotlight and who was being forced into the shadows.
Let's remember, wasn't it just last week Stephen A. was on air bragging about the people he stood up for to get paid and how many, Cam, I did for Shannon Sharp, and I did it for this person and that person. And when I look at the abrupt, I'm not coming into work tomorrow.
Yeah.
That also is maybe there's pointing the finger at.
Even if you chalk the wildest claims up to gossip, the air at ESPN was already thick with tension. Observers, both fans and insiders, had long noticed that Molly and Stephen A.'s on-air clashes were starting to spill into something sharper, more personal. Clips began surfacing online, capturing their live sparring over everything from guest lineups to digs about paychecks and control. Molly once joked she couldn't even use the restroom without Stephen A. knowing, while he lobbed back with half-joking, half-serious remarks that left people wondering just how deep their friction ran. And in a world where whispers move faster than press releases, those moments fed a storm of theories. The true breaking point, insiders say, came only weeks before Molly's abrupt exit. Multiple accounts point to a behind-the-scenes eruption at ESPN's Connecticut headquarters, and altercations so fierce that security had to intervene. Some say Stephen A. accused Molly of betrayal, while she shot back with claims of sabotage. Producers reportedly scrambled to contain the blow-up, keeping chatter off Slack and far from the watchful eyes of higher-ups. This wasn't the kind of dust-up that gets patched over before Monday's taping. It was scorched earth's, the kind of confrontation that leaves only fallout to manage. And fallout came quickly. Molly's departure wasn't rolled out with the usual long runway. One day she was there, the next day she was gone. A speed of exit that screamed unresolved conflict rather than simple contract haggling. ESPN leadership tried to frame it otherwise. Burke Magnus, the network's content chief, issued a carefully worded farewell, praising Molly's contributions since 2006 and claiming they had hoped to find new opportunities for her. It was framed as growth, a new chapter, but to industry veterans, it read like a polished nothing to see here cover. Meanwhile, conveniently timed headlines announced Malika Andrews' massive new contractor. Move fans couldn't help but read as ESPN swapping one high-profile female anchor for another, while sweeping the mess under the rug. Stephen A. himself played the moment with a mix of sentiment and secrecy. On air, he admitted, "To say that I'm sad is an understatement," but quickly locked the door on specifics. "The details are none of y'all business." Off camera, his comments were even more cryptic. He had an idea of what happened, but no, he wouldn't be sharing. To viewers, that was like hanging a do not enter sign on a room with broken glass still on the floor. Meanwhile, the internet turned into a crime board of clips and quotes. Every tense exchange, every sidelong glance, every moment Molly and Stephen A. looked exhausted with each other was reanalyzed under a magnifying glass. One segment, where Stephen A. joked about Molly's eating habits during a break, set off fresh backlash. Was it a harmless quip or another jab rooted in old resentment? Fans split, critics piled on, and suddenly every interaction on First Take looked less like spirited debate and more like evidence in a much bigger feud.
With Molly Qerim, yesterday when we talked, we knew that she was leaving, but we didn't know she was leaving like immediately, which is an indication that, man, this thing's a bit more complicated than just they couldn't settle on the money. It just seems more seriously. She's off.
As Molly's sudden exit played out, the so-called receipts from Stephen A.'s alleged ex-girlfriend began gaining traction. The claims went beyond personal grudges, suggesting Molly wasn't acting alone but was aligned with certain ESPN executives who had their own frustrations. With Stephen A.'s soaring influence, it was the stuff of office politics at its ugliest: ego, jealousy, and backroom maneuvering. The kind of mess that never surfaces in official reports but always finds its way into the gossip cycle. Adding fuel to the fire were whispers about Molly's contract demands, said to be climbing far higher than the network was comfortable with. Behind closed doors, it allegedly became less about hosting duties and more about who held real power, who got the spotlight, the influence, and, most importantly, the paycheck. To conspiracy watchers, ESPN's response looked less like conflict resolution and more like brand protection, especially with rival networks waiting for any sign of weakness. All of this left one burning question: why would a network veteran like Molly risk everything, her reputation, her alliances, even her health, for what looked like a sabotage campaign? Was it an effort to push Stephen A. aside, a fight for equal recognition and compensation, or simply a refusal to be overshadowed as ESPN inked its next round of big money deals? The picture grew murkier when Molly's ongoing health struggles entered the narrative. On one hand, they made her seem like an improbable villain. On the other, the fact that her illness was dragged into the ex's allegations sparked new waves of speculation. Was her health story being used to stir sympathy or as a way to exit quietly before the storm reached its peak?
Goes to FS1 or launches her own show on YouTube. I wish Molly Qerim nothing but the best. I don't want to see her fail, but at the same time, I don't see a path to success. It is hard to build an audience by yourself. It's hard to build and sustain an audience when it's just...
Now we're left with The Wreckage, a flagship show without its steady anchor, a lineup of hopeful replacements circling, and a network insistent that this was nothing more than routine business. But as the smoke refuses to clear, the story feels unfinished, like a puzzle missing its most critical pieces. Stephen A. himself has only deepened the mystery, dropping just enough hints to keep the speculation alive, but never enough to settle the matter. Is he shielding Molly, protecting his own image, or guarding something larger, something that could shake the foundation of ESPN itself? His public comments have been strikingly measured. The same man who built a career on blunt honesty suddenly pulled his punches the moment Molly Qerim's exit became official. "The details are none of y'all business," he told viewers, while conceding that he didn't have the full story. But if history has taught us anything, it's that Stephen A. rarely holds back unless the stakes are radioactive. His silence feels less like ignorance and more like deliberate restraint, a velvet rope drawn tight around a volatile truth. So we sift through the scraps: his cryptic remarks, the rumors, the side-eyed moments on air like detectives on a stormy night, waiting for a light to flicker behind the blackout curtains. because whatever lies beneath this fallout, it's clear the final chapter hasn't been written yet.
A lot of times, some of these things happen, and it's just uncomfortable to see. The details, quite frankly, are none of y'all business. But it's not as if I know all the details. It was a contract negotiation that was going on. ESPN certainly did not want to lose her. But in the end, rather, she made it.
As Molly drives away from ESPN, suitcase in tow, chaos fills the space she leaves behind. The network that once thrived on bold personalities is now scrambling to contain the fallout. Enter Malika Andrews, catapulted forward with a blockbuster contract extension that felt less like coincidence and more like strategy. Was this swap orchestrated long before Molly's exit? Or was she simply collateral damage in a larger, messier power struggle? One veteran producer put it bluntly: power plays are the new sport inside ESPN. Nobody's safe, not even the hosts who seem untouchable. Follow the money. And the picture sharpens. Stephen A. Smith's salary now rivals that of NFL coaches, and his influence often eclipses even longtime executives. Each time ESPN cuts him another massive check, tension inside the studio ratchets higher. Add Malika's rise, and Molly's sudden disappearance looks less like a clean departure, and more like a carefully engineered extraction of someone who no longer fit the network's power structure. And then came the whispers of a blackmail folder. Multiple insiders claimed Molly kept a secret stash, mails, recordings, private notes on arsenal of leverage against top execs and on-air talent. Whether fact or rumor, the possibility alone rattled Bristol. Some sources insist the cash included contract disputes and off-the-record complaints. Others hint at recordings of tense moments between anchors and management. ESPN's legal team has reportedly gone into lockdown mode. If such a file ever surfaced, it could topple careers in a heartbeat. The speculation hasn't stopped there. Was Molly pushing for a payday closer to Stephen A's $20 million haul? Did her illness play into the timing of her exit, an element of sympathy, or a convenient cover for a strategic retreat? Fans are divided. Some see her as a victim of a ruthless workplace. Others as a savvy manipulator who pressed her advantage too far. The truth may be tangled somewhere in between. What's undeniable is that ESPN itself now faces a reckoning. The network insists it's business as usual, but behind the glass towers in Connecticut, the culture looks fragile. Even predatory staffers whisper about power grabs, bruised egos, and a brand that might be eating itself alive. Stephen A's carefully measured silence only intensifies the frenzy. He's shared just enough to keep the public hooked, but never enough to end the speculation. And for a man rarely accused of holding back, that restraint speaks volumes. So here we are, a flagship anchor gone, another star ascendant, and a network that suddenly feels less stable than ever. If even a fraction of these whispers are true, ESPN's most explosive drama isn't on first take, it's unfolding in the boardroom. What secrets remain locked behind those closed doors? Who's next to be ushered out under the cover of personal growth? And how long before the story spills into daylight, no matter how tightly it's controlled? Because in the world of sports media, nothing stays buried forever.